Two women, one man. A love story that turned into the ultimate betrayal. One sister was adored beyond measure, the other, completely invisible. But here's the shocking part. God picked the rejected one to change history forever. What looked like a simple family drama was actually a divine plan centuries in the making. The aftermath of this ancient conflict, it shaped the fate of an entire people. But here's what nobody tells you. Why did Jacob get tricked on his wedding night? What was the real story behind that wife swap? And what dark secret was Laban desperately trying to hide? Stay with me until the very end, because what you learned in Sunday school, that's not the full story, not even close. What everyone called betrayal, God called it destiny. The night sky stretched endlessly above the desert like a blanket of darkness and whispers. Jacob, completely exhausted from walking for what felt like forever, desperately searched for somewhere to collapse. His feet screamed with pain after every single step. Ever since running away from his furious brother Esau, Jacob had been carrying this heavy mix of terror and tiny threads of hope in his chest. But right now, in this exact moment, all he wanted was to close his eyes and rest. He spotted a rock, grabbed it to use as a pillow, and under that massive sea of stars, he finally let his eyes shut. Sleep grabbed him almost instantly. And then the dream happened. He saw a ladder, an actual ladder, stretching all the way up to heaven. It rose so high that his eyes couldn't even see where it ended. Angels were going up and down on it, moving in this perfect, beautiful rhythm, like they were following orders from somewhere beyond understanding. At the very top, this brilliant, blinding light was shining, lighting up absolutely everything around it. His heart started pounding in his chest as he heard a voice, deep, powerful, yet somehow gentle. "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac. This ground you're sleeping on right now, I'm giving it to you and everyone who comes after you. I'm going to be with you wherever you wander. I'll bring you back to this exact spot. I won't abandon you until I've done everything I've promised." Those words jolted him awake like lightning. The air felt different now, heavier, charged with something sacred, something untouchable. His chest was rising and falling fast, and his heart was racing out of control. He sat up slowly, looking all around him. The night was still there, and thousands of silent stars were still sparkling above. But inside him, everything had changed. "This place," he whispered, getting to his feet slowly. "This place is holy. God himself was here, and I had no idea." With deep respect, he picked up the rock he'd been sleeping on and lifted it up as a monument. He poured oil over it, making that piece of ground sacred. He named it Bethel, the house of God. Right there before the invisible presence, he made a promise. "If God stays with me on this journey, protects me, gives me food to eat and clothes to wear, and lets me come back home safely to my Father's house, then the Lord will be my God." When the first rays of sunlight broke through the darkness, he started walking again. His destination, Haran, the land where his uncle Laban lived. He had no clue what was waiting for him there, but his heart was now filled with something new, a certainty. God was walking with him. The sun climbed higher and higher as Jacob pushed forward along the dry, dusty path. The heat was brutal. His throat dried up fast. After walking for hours and hours, he finally saw it, a well. Nearby, some shepherds were sitting in the shade of a few scattered trees, just waiting around. The well's opening was covered by this massive stone, and the men seemed to be waiting for the perfect moment to roll it away together. As he watched the scene unfold, his eyes were suddenly drawn to a young woman walking toward them. She was leading a flock of sheep, moving with this natural grace that made her stand out. There was something about her that seemed to glow under the sunlight. Her dark hair swayed gently in the breeze, and her eyes carried this sweet, enchanting kindness. Jacob felt his heart start to race. He'd never, ever seen anyone like her. "Who is she?" he asked one of the shepherds, barely able to get the words out. Rachel, the man answered, Laban's daughter. Rachel, the name sounded like music in his mind. As she came closer, Jacob felt his throat go completely dry, but he couldn't look away. It was like time itself had slowed down around them. When their eyes finally met, this invisible current seemed to connect them instantly. He didn't know where he suddenly found the strength, but driven by pure impulse, he stepped forward and all by himself rolled that massive stone off the well. The shepherds watched in total shock. Jacob then filled the water trough and gave Rachel's sheep water to drink. He didn't say a single word. And then, completely overcome with emotion, Jacob wept. Rachel stared at him with curious, confused eyes. Who was this stranger who had just burst into her life like an unexpected storm? But neither of them knew yet. This meeting was about to change their lives forever. Jacob stayed close to Rachel as she led her sheep out to pasture. The silence between them was filled only by the bleating of animals and the whisper of wind through the trees. Rachel kept glancing at him, trying to figure out who this emotional stranger really was. When they arrived at Laban's house, a servant announced their arrival. Laban himself came rushing out to greet them, and when he saw Jacob, his face broke into this huge smile. "You're my sister Rebekah's son," he exclaimed, pulling Jacob into a warm embrace. "You're my own blood, come in, stay in my house." Jacob told his story about Bethel, about the dream. Laban listened with interest, but his eyes were sizing up the young man with a sharp, calculating gleam. It was obvious. Jacob was strong and hardworking. A man like that, very useful. Days went by and Jacob stayed at his uncle's place. From the very first morning, he offered to help with everything, tending the flocks, organizing the pastures. Over time, he became absolutely indispensable. Laban, realizing just how valuable Jacob was, decided to make him an offer. "You're my relative and you've been working for me, but you shouldn't work for free. Tell me, what do you want as payment?" Jacob didn't even hesitate. His heart had already decided. "I'll work for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban raised an eyebrow. Rachel was his precious jewel, the most beautiful of his daughters, but 7 years of hard labor, that was worth a lot. He smiled. "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay with me." The deal was made. Jacob would work for 7 years for Rachel, and when that time was up, she'd become his wife. The days melted into months. The months melted into years. For Jacob, time seemed to fly by because his love for Rachel grew stronger with every single sunrise. Her smile, the sound of her laughter, the way she moved her hands while caring for the sheep, everything in him longed to have her by his side forever. And then finally, the 7th year arrived. Jacob stood before Laban, his eyes shining with joy and confidence. "The time is up. Give me my wife now so I can finally be with her." Laban nodded slowly, but inside him, a plan was already in motion. There was something Jacob didn't know yet. The agreement was sealed, but would Laban actually keep his word? Before we go any further, can I ask you something? If this story is gripping you right now, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and smash the like. It helps us bring you more of these powerful, untold Bible stories. Let's keep going together. Jacob's days working for Laban turned into weeks, then months, and finally years. From sunrise to sunset, he worked non-stop in the fields. He tended the flocks, led the sheep to the best grazing spots, protected them from wild animals and freezing nights. His arms grew strong. His skin became rough from the sun, but inside him, one single thought kept him going: Rachel. The love he felt for her made any sacrifice feel easy. Even on the hardest days, when the scorching sun burned his skin and the weight of the work bent his back, just seeing her in the distance among the sheep was enough to renew his strength. He dreamed of the day when he'd finally take her as his wife, when he could call Rachel his own and build a life beside her. Rachel had special feelings for Jacob too. From day one, she'd been drawn to his determination and kindness. As the years passed, their bond grew stronger and stronger. It was impossible to hide the stolen glances, the subtle smiles, the moments when Jacob went out of his way to help her with little tasks, even when she didn't need it. But not everyone was happy about their love. Leah, Rachel's older sister, watched everything in complete silence. While everyone admired Rachel's beauty and grace, hardly anyone noticed Leah. Her eyes carried a hidden tenderness, but her future seemed uncertain. Unlike her younger sister, Leah wasn't seen as beautiful. Her presence was quiet, her voice soft, her movements always careful, trying not to draw any attention. But in her heart, she kept a secret. With each passing day, with every moment she saw Jacob smiling at Rachel, her chest tightened. Time didn't erase the silent sorrow growing inside her. She knew that according to tradition, the oldest daughter was supposed to be married before the younger one. But what would happen to her? Would any man ever choose to marry her? Laban was aware of this tradition too, and it troubled him deeply. If Rachel got married first, who would take Leah? No suitor had shown any interest in her so far. The thought of having an unmarried daughter living in his house forever, that was a burden he couldn't bear. As the 7 years came close to ending, Laban started searching for a solution. His cunning eyes looked for a way to secure Leah's future without losing the benefits of Jacob's hard work. Meanwhile, Jacob barely noticed what was happening around him. His heart was filled only with Rachel and counting down the days until he could finally have her as his wife. When the final day of service arrived, Jacob felt this uncontrollable rush of joy. His work was done. He'd fulfilled his part of the deal. Now it was time to claim his reward. With his heart pounding, he stood before Laban. "The time is up. Give me my wife so I can be with her." Laban looked at him for a moment, this mysterious smile on his lips. He nodded slowly. "We'll hold a great feast to celebrate. Tonight, you'll take your wife." Jacob's heart filled with pure joy. The day he'd been waiting for had finally come. But what he didn't know was that, as he celebrated, a plan was already set in motion. Jacob's love was strong, but destiny had already been written. The celebration night arrived with massive fanfare. Laban's camp filled with guests, servants, distant relatives. Wine flowed freely. Torches lit up the night. Voices rose in songs of celebration. For Jacob, this was the fulfillment of everything he'd waited for during 7 long years. Rachel had barely been seen during the feast. Tradition said the bride stayed hidden until the moment she was brought to the groom. Jacob, drunk on happiness and plenty of wine, barely noticed Laban's sneaky glances or the tension on the faces of some servants. Finally, the moment came. The young woman, covered by a thick veil, was brought to him. The torches cast dancing shadows everywhere, and Jacob's excitement was so overwhelming his heart felt like it would burst out of his chest. He took his bride by the hand, feeling her delicate, hesitant fingers beneath his own. The walk to the bridal tent felt like a dream. He could hardly wait to finally have Rachel as his own. They entered the darkened chamber. Jacob, overcome by anticipation and the effects of the wine, united with the woman he believed was his beloved. The night passed in a whirlwind of emotions. The silence outside the tent showed that the guests had already left to rest. Jacob slept deeply, soothed by exhaustion and the relief of finally having Rachel by his side. But then came the morning. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the tent, dissolving the shadows of the night. Jacob stirred awake, still feeling the warmth of his wife's body beside him. He smiled. With a light heart, he turned to look at her. That's when the shock hit him like a knife to the chest. It was not Rachel. What he saw beside him made his chest tighten and his blood run ice cold. Leah, the elder sister. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and resignation. Her eyes avoided his, but the expression on her face confirmed the terrible truth. Jacob leaped out of bed, yanking the covers away and stepping back like he'd been struck by lightning. His breath quickened. His heart pounded against his ribs. "What is this?" His voice exploded into the morning silence. "What have you done, Lee?" Lee lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Fury overtook Jacob. He stormed out of the tent, leaving Lee behind, and marched straight toward Laban's dwelling. His anger burned like an uncontrollable wildfire. When he found his father-in-law, he grabbed him by the arm and spun him around sharply. "What have you done to me?" His voice trembled with rage. "I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why did you give me Lee?" Laban, showing zero signs of remorse, adjusted his robe and replied with this infuriating calmness. "Here in our land, it's not our custom to give the younger daughter before the firstborn." Those words fell on Jacob like a crushing weight. He felt betrayed, deceived, manipulated like a mere pawn in Laban's game. "You lied to me," Jacob shouted, clenching his fists. "You made me work all these years for Rachel, only to trick me like this." Laban raised his hands in this fake, calming gesture, but his voice stayed cold and calculated. "Complete the bridal week with Lee. After that, I'll give you Rachel as well, provided you work for me another 7 years. Jacob felt like the ground had been ripped out from under his feet. 7 more years. How could Laban be so cruel, so cunning? How could he toy with his feelings and use him like this? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. He didn't want Lee. He'd never wanted Lee. But Rachel, his love for her still burned in his chest. If he refused, he'd lose the only woman he'd ever truly loved. His heart was torn between rage and hope. Laban's betrayal was complete, but the worst was yet to come. Jacob felt the weight of betrayal crushing his chest. He stepped away from Laban, fists clenched, trying to contain the fury pulsing through his blood. The man standing before him stayed impassive, like his dishonesty was just a minor detail in some everyday business deal. But for Jacob, this wasn't just an unfair agreement. This was the destruction of his dreams, the cruel blow that shattered the future he'd waited for so long. "How dare you deceive me like this?" Jacob shouted, his voice echoing through the camp. Some servants and shepherds stopped what they were doing, watching the confrontation between the two men. Jacob's eyes were filled with fury, but Laban, with his calculating expression, seemed completely unbothered. "I've already explained, Jacob," Laban said, crossing his arms. "I can't give the younger daughter before the firstborn." "But you never said that before. You made me work 7 years, made me wait, made me dream. And now you're forcing me to accept something I never asked for." Laban sighed, like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "Listen, Jacob," he said, his voice ice cold. "The marriage has been consummated. Lee is now your wife." Jacob held his breath. "But if you still want Rachel, there's a solution." Silence hung between them. Jacob felt his heart tighten. He already knew he wouldn't like what he was about to hear. "Work for me another 7 years, Laban finally said, his tone carrying fake generosity. "And Rachel will also be your wife." Jacob felt his body go rigid. Another 7 years. It was a devastating blow. He'd already lost so much time, and now he'd have to give another 7 years of his life to a deceitful man. He looked around, at the servants watching with pity in their eyes, at the desert stretching beyond the camp, at Lee's tent, his wife against his will. And then his gaze fell on Rachel. She stood a little apart, her delicate figure almost hidden in the morning shadows. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she looked at him with both hope and fear. She too had been deceived, and now her future depended on his choice. Jacob closed his eyes. He could run. He could abandon everything, reject Lee, and leave for good. But what about Rachel? If he left, he'd never have her. The thought of losing her was unbearable. Despair tightened around his chest like a cruel hand. He'd always known love required sacrifice, but he'd never imagined the price would be this high. Laban watched him in silence, waiting for his decision. Jacob took a deep breath. There was no other choice. "I accept," he said. Each word felt like a wound to his own pride. Laban smiled with satisfaction and nodded. "Good. Finish your bridal week with Leah, and then Rachel will be your wife. But remember, Jacob, the 7 years must still be completed." Jacob felt anger burning inside him, but he swallowed it like bitter poison. He'd do whatever it took to have Rachel by his side. But would he truly accept it, or would he find another way? Night fell gently over Laban's camp. The glow of torches lit up the faces of guests gathered to celebrate Jacob and Rachel's wedding. The smell of spices lingered in the air, mixing with the sound of flutes and songs echoing beneath the stars. Jacob was glowing. After 14 years of waiting and suffering, he was finally taking Rachel as his wife. Time hadn't weakened his love for her, not even a little. His heart pounded as he saw her approaching, wrapped in a fine veil that reflected the torchlight. Rachel's deep, shining eyes met Jacob's through the folds of the fabric. There was no doubt, no deception this time. She was the woman he'd chosen from the very beginning, the one he'd endured years of labor and humiliation for. Laban, with a satisfied smile, watched the ceremony. To him, this marriage wasn't just a union of love. It was a well-played move in his game of ambition. Now both his daughters were married, and Jacob was firmly tied to his family. The celebration lasted until late into the night, with dancing and songs honoring the couple. But someone watched everything from a distance, in silence. Leah, seated in the shadow of a tent, she witnessed every moment with a tight chest. Though she was the first wife, she knew she'd never truly been desired. The way Jacob looked at Rachel was different, filled with love and devotion, something he'd never shown Leah. She clenched her fingers around the fabric of her dress and looked away. Her position was uncomfortable, and the humiliation weighed heavily on her shoulders. The next morning, Jacob emerged from the bridal tent with a smile on his face. He felt complete, like God's promise was finally coming true. But his happiness met an immediate obstacle. Leah was there. She said nothing. She just kept her eyes lowered like she was waiting for something. Jacob felt growing unease. Leah was still his wife, but how could he divide his life between two women? How could he give attention to the one who'd been forced on him against his will? The following days were a test of endurance. Rachel, fully aware of Jacob's love for her, made sure to assert her place by his side. She walked with him through the camp, exchanged smiles and touches, and radiated confidence. But deep inside, that confidence was starting to crack, because there was a burden weighing on her shoulders. Rachel couldn't conceive. Months passed, yet no child grew in her womb. Jacob's gaze remained full of love, but the pressure from family and society was constant. Meanwhile, Leah conceived. The news spread quickly, and the camp's reaction was intense. The less-loved wife was now carrying Jacob's firstborn. The pain in Rachel's eyes was obvious, though she tried to hide it. Jacob also felt the weight of this reality. He didn't love Leah, but now she was the mother of his child. Leah, for her part, felt a mix of triumph and sadness. At last, she had something Rachel didn't, yet she knew that not even this would win Jacob's heart. Jacob's camp, once a refuge of love and hope, was turning into a battlefield of rivalry and tension. The rivalry between the sisters was only beginning. Days turned into months, and Jacob's household became a silent battlefield. The love he gave to Rachel was obvious to everyone. The disdain he showed Leah was a burden she carried alone. Every glance, every gesture, every moment made it painfully clear. Jacob saw her as an obligation, not a companion. Still, Leah remained strong, carrying the responsibility of being a wife and mother in a home that had never truly belonged to her. Rachel, on the other hand, knew she was loved. She walked through the camp with pride, knowing she was the favorite, the chosen one. Yet a dark shadow loomed over her happiness. No matter how much Jacob loved and desired her, she remained barren. With every full moon, her hope renewed, only to be crushed once more. Listen, I need you to pause for just a second. If you're feeling this story deep in your soul right now, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. Help us keep sharing these powerful Bible stories that churches don't always tell. Now, let's keep going. Leah's cries rose to the heavens every night. She didn't ask for riches. She didn't even ask for Jacob's love anymore. She only wished to be seen, to be valued, to be recognized as someone worthy of respect. And God heard her. Her womb was filled with life. When the news spread through the camp, the reactions were immediate. Leah had conceived, while Rachel remained childless. The older sister now carried an heir for Jacob. Leah gave birth to a son and named him Reuben ***, saying, "The Lord has seen my affliction. Now my husband will love me." But that wasn't the reality. Jacob didn't change. His gaze didn't soften toward Leah. His affection for Rachel didn't fade even a little. Reuben's birth didn't bring the acceptance Leah had hoped for. Even so, God didn't abandon her. Once again, Leah conceived and bore another son. She named him Simon ***, saying, "The Lord has heard that I am despised and has given me this son also." Yet still, Jacob remained distant. Leah, persistent in her faith, was blessed with a third son. She named him Levi ***, saying, "Now at last my husband will be attached to me." But Jacob kept his distance. Then Leah conceived again and bore a fourth son. She named him Judah ***. But this time, her words were different. "This time I will praise the Lord." Something changed within Leah. Before, she'd been seeking her husband's approval. Now, her heart found rest in the God who saw her and honored her, even when men didn't. While Leah bore child after child, Rachel felt increasingly humiliated. Her pride was like fragile armor, shattering with each child her sister brought into the world. She felt powerless, forgotten by God, and her pain turned into bitterness. She spent her days in torment, avoiding the sight of the children running through the camp, ignoring the laughter echoing around her. Every time she saw Jacob holding one of Leah's sons in his arms, a silent fury grew inside her. One night, unable to bear it any longer, Rachel confronted Jacob. "Give me children, or I will die." Jacob, who treated her with tenderness for so long, burst into anger. "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" Rachel felt exposed, like her shame had been laid bare before everyone. The rivalry between the sisters had reached an irreversible point. The Lord would intervene, but would it bring peace or more conflict? Jacob's tents were always filled with the laughter of children. Leah, the despised wife, was now the mother of 4 sons, and each of them carried a promise. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah grew under their mother's watchful eyes. Despite Jacob's indifference, Leah found comfort in God's blessing. On the other hand, Rachel, the beloved one, the woman of Jacob's dreams, felt trapped in an ever-tightening shadow. Her womb remained barren, her soul wounded. With each new birth, Rachel felt the weight of humiliation grow heavier. Leah, the sister who'd always lived in her shadow, now walked through the camp with quiet pride. Her children ran freely, played around the campfires, and Jacob, even if restrained, couldn't ignore them. Rachel, however, had only silence and shame. Days turned into years. Every time Leah felt the first signs of a new pregnancy, Rachel withdrew, unable to bear it. Envy grew like a fire in her chest, consuming the joy she once had. After all, what was the value of Jacob's love if she couldn't give him children? She watched as Leah sang to her boys while weaving their clothes. She saw the children running into their mother's arms, and something inside her shattered. The pain became unbearable. In her frustration, Rachel began treating Leah with coldness. Once, her superiority had been natural, but now it became a shield to hide her weakness. When the women of the camp spoke of Leah's blessings, Rachel walked away. When the servants commented on the strength of Leah's sons, Rachel silenced them with a single look. But none of this eased her agony. One day, consumed by despair, Rachel couldn't hold back her anguish any longer. With tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, she approached Jacob. "Give me children, or I will die." Her plea was a cry of pain, an echo of her broken soul. Jacob, caught off guard, erupted in anger. He, a man who'd faced so many challenges, who'd waited years for Rachel, bear being blamed for something only God controlled. "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from conceiving?" The silence that followed was cutting. Rachel looked away. Jacob's words felt like a wound to her soul. She couldn't accept this fate. She couldn't allow Leah to keep triumphing while she, the beloved one, remained empty. That night Rachel didn't sleep. As the camp sank into darkness, her mind raced. She needed a solution. Then she remembered the story of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Like her, Sarah had been barren for many years, and in her anguish she'd offered her servant Hagar to bear a child in her place. Rachel saw her answer. The next morning, determined and without hesitation, she presented her servant Bilhah to Jacob. "Take my servant as a wife. She will conceive in my place, and through her I will have children." Jacob looked at Rachel, surprised, but the desperation in his beloved's eyes was obvious. He knew Rachel's desire for a child was greater than anything. And so, Bilhah was given to Jacob. How far would Rachel go to change her fate? Rachel watched every detail of Bilhah's pregnancy with sharp eyes. Though she didn't carry the child in her own womb, she felt victory was near. When the first signs of labor appeared, her heart raced. Finally, she'd have a child to call her own. Bilhah gave birth to a son, and Rachel took him into her arms with tears streaming down her face. "His name shall be Dan," she declared, "for God has judged me and heard my voice." The camp was soon filled with whispers. Leah, watching in silence, felt a weight in her chest. Rachel now held a son in her arms, a child Jacob welcomed with affection. But the rivalry was far from over. Time passed, and Bilhah bore another son for Jacob. Growing ever more proud, Rachel lifted the child in her arms. "His name shall be Naphtali *, she said, "for I have wrestled with my sister and prevailed." Leah heard those words and felt a shiver run through her. Was this her defeat? Her heart clenched as she saw Jacob smiling at Rachel's sons. The decision struck her like lightning. If Rachel used her servant to bear children, then Leah would do the same. That night she approached Jacob and declared firmly, "Take my servant Zilpah as a wife, so that I too may have more children through her." Jacob, weary of the ongoing rivalry between the sisters, nodded in silence. Soon Zilpah conceived. When the child was born, Leah smiled. "His name shall be Gad," she announced, "for great fortune has come to me." Days later, the servant became pregnant again and bore another son. "His name shall be Asher," Leah said triumphantly, "for I am happy and women will call me blessed." The camp had now become a battlefield of silent competition. Jealousy burned like fire, and the children of each woman became trophies in this unspoken war. One afternoon, Reuben, Leah's firstborn, returned from the fields carrying mandrakes, roots known for their association with fertility. When Rachel saw them, she couldn't suppress her longing. "Give me some of your son's mandrakes," she pleaded with Leah. Leah stared at her coldly. Isn't it enough that you've taken my husband? Now you also want my son's mandrakes." Rachel took a deep breath. She needed those roots. "If you give me the mandrakes, Jacob will lie with you tonight," she offered. Leah hesitated for a moment, then she accepted the deal. That night, as Jacob returned from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. "Tonight you will be with me," she said with determination, "for I have bought you with my son's mandrakes." Jacob didn't argue. He entered her tent. How long would this battle between sisters continue? Jacob's camp was filled with the laughter of children. The sons of Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah ran between the tents, while their mothers exchanged glances of pride and rivalry. Leah had already given Jacob 6 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun ***. In addition, her servant Zilpah had brought *Gad and Asher * into the world. Bilhah, Rachel's servant, had borne *Dan and Naphtali ***. Yet despite so many children, Rachel remained anguished. Though she was the most beloved wife, the pain of infertility consumed her. She saw Jacob's gaze soften whenever he looked at Leah's children, and she felt the crushing weight of frustration. Rachel tried to find joy in the sons Bilhah had given her, but the emptiness remained. She watched as Leah cradled little Zebulun and wondered if she'd ever have that opportunity. Jacob, always patient, tried to comfort her. "Rachel, my love for you doesn't depend on children," he said, holding her hands. But Rachel wanted more. She longed for a child of her own. While Rachel struggled with her pain, Leah, already a mother to many, was blessed once again. Tears filled her eyes when she realized she was carrying another child. When her daughter was born, Leah held her in her arms and whispered, "Her name shall be Dinah ***. But even with so many children, Jacob's love remained with Rachel. Nothing seemed to change that. Then one day, Rachel felt something different. Her body was changing. Time passed, and the signs became undeniable. She was pregnant. The news spread quickly, and the camp filled with whispers. Leah watched from afar, hiding her emotions. Jacob, however, was overcome with joy. "The Lord has heard my cry," Rachel whispered as tears streamed down her face. Months passed, and the long-awaited day finally arrived. The pains of childbirth were intense, but Rachel endured them, driven by hope. Then the newborn's cry filled the tent. Jacob took the baby in his arms and looked at Rachel with a smile. "A son, Rachel, our son." She gazed at him with tenderness and whispered, "His name shall be Joseph ***, for the Lord has added a son to me." Now that Rachel had a son, would she finally find peace? Years passed, and Jacob's camp grew. His children played among the flocks, and his wives tended to the tents and daily tasks. Joseph, Rachel's long-awaited son, grew healthy in his mother's arms, who now displayed a happiness she'd never known before. Yet despite the joy in his home, Jacob felt the weight of servitude. He'd worked for 14 years for Laban, first for Leah, then for Rachel, but now he longed for something more. Freedom. One day, Jacob approached Laban, finding him seated near the livestock pens. "Let me leave, Laban," Jacob said firmly. "I've fulfilled my duty and served you faithfully. I want to take my family and begin my own journey." Laban frowned. He knew Jacob's presence had brought blessings. Since his son-in-law arrived, his flocks had prospered like never before. "Stay, Jacob," Laban insisted. "I know that God favors you, and because of you my wealth has increased. Name your wages and I'll pay them." Jacob thought carefully. He knew his father-in-law was cunning, always seeking ways to profit at others' expense. But Jacob was no longer a naive young man. "I want nothing from you," Jacob said. "Only allow me to keep the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals from your flock. The pure and white ones will remain yours." Laban smiled, seeing an advantage. He knew most animals were born without blemishes. To him, it was a fair deal. "It's agreed," Laban said, shaking Jacob's hand. But as always, Laban had a plan. That very night, he ordered his sons to take the best speckled animals far away, separating them from the herd. This way, Jacob would have little chance of success. Jacob realized the betrayal, but he didn't lose faith. He trusted that God was with him. He began applying a curious technique. He cut branches from trees and peeled parts of them, exposing white stripes. Then he placed these branches in the watering troughs where the animals came to drink and mate. Miraculously, the newborn animals were speckled and spotted, exactly what he needed. Month after month, Jacob's flock grew. The strongest animals always belonged to him, while the weaker ones remained with Laban. Laban watched in astonishment and fury. How could Jacob be prospering so much? Laban's sons began whispering among themselves. "Jacob has stolen our father's wealth," they said. Laban started looking at Jacob differently. The favoritism and friendly tone turned into envy and resentment. Jacob sensed the atmosphere around him was changing. What had once been a working relationship was now becoming a trap. One night as he slept, Jacob had a dream. God appeared to him and said, "Rise, Jacob, return to the land of your fathers, and I will be with you." Upon waking, Jacob knew it was time to leave. He could no longer trust Laban. But how could he flee without being stopped? Would Jacob allow himself to be deceived once again? This time, dawn brought an irrevocable decision. Jacob looked at his vast flock, his wives, his children, knowing he could no longer remain under Laban's control. God had called him back to the land of his fathers. But with that calling came a terrifying truth: the reunion with asterisk. Knowing Laban wouldn't allow his departure easily, Jacob planned his escape carefully. He waited until Laban was far away, busy shearing his sheep. Then he gathered all his possessions, servants, and family. Rachel, his beloved wife, cast one last glance at her father's land before leaving. But before setting out, she secretly took something: Laban's household idols. The caravan departed in the dead of night, moving swiftly along dusty trails, guided only by the light of the stars. But Jacob knew he couldn't run forever. 3 days later, Laban discovered Jacob had left. Fury burned in his heart, and he gathered his men to pursue him. For 7 days, they rode tirelessly until they finally caught up with Jacob at the foothills of the mountains of Gilead **. Laban burst forth in anger. "How dare you flee like a thief? Why have you stolen my idols?" Jacob, surprised, furrowed his brow. He'd stolen nothing. But before he could answer, Rachel had hidden the idols under her saddle and sat on them. When Laban searched the tents for the stolen objects, she pretended to be unwell and didn't rise, deceiving her father. After a heated argument, Jacob and Laban reached an agreement. They erected a pillar of stones as a witness that they wouldn't harm each other from that day forward. "May the Lord watch between us when we are apart from each other," Laban said, looking into Jacob's eyes. And so Laban departed, returning to his land. While Jacob continued on his journey toward the unknown, now with Laban out of the way, he turned his attention to an even greater fear. Esau, the brother he'd deceived, the one who'd sworn to kill him. Jacob sent messengers ahead, carrying gifts and words of humility. But when the messengers returned, his blood ran cold. "Esau is coming to meet you," they said, "and he's bringing 400 men." Jacob felt the crushing weight of fear on his chest. He had no army. He had wives, children, and defenseless servants. In anguish, Jacob fell to his knees. "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac," he cried, "you commanded me to return to my land, and I have obeyed. But I am unworthy of all the blessings you've given me. Deliver me from Esau's wrath, for I fear he will come and destroy everything I have." After praying, he divided his caravan into 2 groups, thinking, "If Esau attacks one group, the other may escape." Then, in one last desperate act, he sent servants ahead with gifts for his brother: flocks, goats, rams, and camels, all carefully chosen to appease Esau's fury. As night fell, Jacob was left alone, awaiting the dawn that would seal his fate. But an even greater danger awaited him on the road ahead. The dust had not yet settled from Jacob's hurried departure when a storm of anger and suspicion caught up with him. Laban, accompanied by his men, advanced furiously. His eyes burned and his heart filled with rage. For 7 days, he pursued Jacob through the desert trails until he finally cornered him in the mountains of Gilead. "How dare you flee in secret like a thief in the dead of night?" Laban roared, glaring at Jacob with barely restrained fury. "I would have sent you off with a feast, with songs and tambourines." Jacob crossed his arms, standing firm. "I fled because I feared you'd stop me from leaving with my family. I worked for you for 20 years, and yet you treat me like a stranger." Laban narrowed his eyes. "Then why did you steal my idols?" A heavy silence followed. Jacob frowned, confused. "Steal them, let whoever took them die," he declared without hesitation, completely unaware of the secret hidden so close to him. As Laban's men searched each tent, Rachel sat calmly atop a camel's saddle, pressing her fingers against the worn leather beneath her. Well hidden were her father's idols. Her heart pounded like an unsteady drum. When Laban approached, she looked up at him sweetly and sighed. "Forgive me, my father," she said gently, "but I cannot rise. The ways of women are upon me." Laban hesitated. Tradition forbade him from forcing her to move in such a state. With one last suspicious glance, he moved on, unaware that his own blood had deceived him. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, suppressing a shiver. She knew Jacob would never have approved of her act. But why had she taken the idols? Was it revenge against her manipulative father, or a final thread of attachment to her childhood home? Laban found nothing, yet he still maintained his posture of superiority. "Everything you see around you is mine," he said, gazing at Jacob's flocks and children. "But may the Lord judge between us." Weary from years of injustice, Jacob rose with fury. "I worked for you day and night, enduring the cold and the heat, being deceived countless times. If it weren't for the God of my father, you would have sent me away empty-handed." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Laban realized he no longer had control over Jacob. With no other choice, Laban proposed a pact. A heap of stones was raised as a witness between them. "May the Lord watch between us when we are apart from each other," Laban declared solemnly. Jacob agreed, and the 2 men shared a meal, sealing the agreement. The next morning, Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren and departed, vanishing into the horizon. But as Jacob watched the dust settle, a chill ran down his spine. Laban was a defeated enemy, but another danger awaited him. What was Rachel hiding, and why? The wind howled over the mountains of Gilead, as if nature itself sensed the weight of the revelation about to unfold. Jacob, still recovering from the confrontation with Laban, felt restless. Something in Laban's words lingered in his mind. As night fell, Laban approached, this time without fury but with a heavy look, burdened by something he'd kept for years. "Jacob," his voice was strangely low, "there's something I never told you." Jacob crossed his arms, waiting. "Rachel," Laban hesitated, as if the words burned inside him. "She was already promised to another man before you even arrived in my land." The revelation struck Jacob like a blow to the chest. "What?" His voice came out hoarse. "How dare you hide this from me?" Laban lowered his eyes. "When you first saw Rachel and your heart filled with love for her, it was already too late. Her fate had already been sealed. Then why did you let me work for 7 years for her?" Jacob stepped forward, furious. Laban sighed. Because I needed time. If that man returned to claim her, I would have had to give her away. But he never came back, and I saw an opportunity. Jacob felt his blood boil. An opportunity. You deceived me. You used the lives of your daughters like pieces in a game. Laban raised a hand. And Lee, do you think she wasn't a victim too? Jacob stopped. Lee, who had remained silent until then, lowered her head. Since I was a child, I heard that I would never be chosen, she murmured, her voice trembling. But my father promised he would find a fate for me. She lifted her tear-filled eyes. That night when I was given to you, I knew I would never be loved, but at least I would have a husband. The pain in Lee's eyes pierced Jacob in an unexpected way. He'd never stopped to think about how much she had suffered too. But before Jacob could respond, Rachel stepped forward, her face pale with fury and hurt. "And me," she shouted, her eyes blazing, "was my life decided without my consent? I was promised to another man and no one told me." Laban looked at his daughter, and for the first time he seemed ashamed. "I did what I thought was best for our family." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Best for whom? For you, or for your game of manipulation?" Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Then she looked at Jacob. "And you, do you still believe that everything we lived was real?" Silence fell between them. Jacob looked at Rachel, then at Lee, and realized that his entire story there was stained by lies. Nothing was as it seemed. He hadn't won Rachel as he believed. Lee hadn't chosen to be there, and Rachel had been deceived just as much as he had. Everything they believed was a lie. And now what? The night was silent, with only the sound of the wind blowing over the hills of Gilead, filling the void between them. Jacob felt the weight of the truth on his shoulders. For years, he'd believed he was fighting only for Rachel's love. But now, he saw that God had been guiding his journey in a way he could never have imagined. Jacob walked alone through the camp, his mind racing. He'd always thought his life was just a game between him and Laban, but now he realized there was something greater at play. "God," he whispered, looking up at the starry sky, "I have always fought for what I wanted," never realizing that you already had a plan. At that moment, he understood. He hadn't chosen Lee, but God had chosen her to be the mother of a nation. He'd fought for Rachel, but God had allowed his heart to mature. Everything that had happened, no matter how painful, had a purpose. As Jacob reflected, Lee and Rachel sat together inside the tent. The resentment between them was as old as their marriage itself. But now, faced with the truth, something had changed. "I never wanted to take your place, Rachel," Lee said in a low voice, "but I always knew I was never the chosen one." Rachel looked at her sister, feeling, for the first time, a compassion she'd never allowed herself before. "I suffered too," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I always fought to be first in Jacob's life, and when I finally had a son, I realized it was not enough." Lee reached out and touched Rachel's hand. "A man's love would never bring the peace we were searching for." Her words resonated in Rachel's heart. All her life, she'd believed that being loved by Jacob would make her whole. But now, she saw that the love she'd truly been missing came from God. For the first time, the sisters embraced, without rivalry. The next morning, Jacob gathered his family. He looked at Lee and Rachel, realizing that something had changed within them. "We will set out for the land that God has promised us," he announced. "But this time, not as rivals or enemies. We will go together as a restored family." Laban, in turn, realized he'd lost control over his daughter's fate. "May the God of Abraham and Isaac be with you, Jacob," he said at last, finally letting go. And with that, Jacob, his wives, his children, and his flocks set out toward the future that God had prepared for them. What a story that began in deception ended in grace. Years had passed. Jacob, now older and wiser, sat in the shade of a great date palm. His eyes, marked by time and trials, scanned the camp before him. He saw his children, the sons of Leah, of Rachel, and of the servants, all growing into prosperous tribes, just as God had promised. He remembered the pain that had accompanied him for so many years, the struggle for Rachel, the rivalry between the sisters, Laban's dishonesty. But now, as he looked at his great family, he saw something greater. The grace of God had triumphed over it all. Jacob watched Joseph, his beloved son, helping his brothers organize the livestock. He recalled how Rachel had suffered for not being able to bear children, and how, in the end, God had blessed her with Joseph and Benjamin. He also thought of Leah, who, though once rejected, had become the mother of 6 tribes of Israel, including Judah from whom the Messiah would one day be born. The story of his life had not been written by chance. Every pain, every betrayal, every tear had served a greater purpose. Jacob lifted his eyes to the heavens. "Now I understand, Lord," he whispered. "What seemed like deception was, in truth, your hand guiding me toward the destiny you had prepared." Jacob's sons, who'd once carried the burden of their mother's rivalry, were now learning to walk together. The promise made to Abraham and Isaac was being fulfilled through them. The people of Israel were being formed, not through disputes, but through the grace of God. The cycle of hatred had been broken, and grace had triumphed over betrayal. But what did the future still hold for Jacob and his sons? Listen, friend. If this story has touched your heart, if it's opened your eyes to something deeper about God's plan, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because these are the Bible stories that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Stories of pain, redemption, and a God who turns betrayal into destiny. Don't keep this to yourself. Let's spread the truth together. And remember, God's plan is always bigger than our pain. Always. See you in the next one.